The group chat buzzed on my phone for the seventh time that morning. Photos of airline tickets, excitement over beach outfits, messages filled with emojis and exclamation marks from my mother, my brother Daniel, his wife, my cousin Laura, and even Uncle Jeff. Everyone was clearly thrilled about the upcoming family holiday. Everyone except me. I scrolled through the messages in silence, rereading one in particular. "Anna, can you send your flight details so we can coordinate airport pickups?" I hadn't received any information about where we were staying. No address, no booking, no room assignment. So I texted Mom directly. "Hey, just double checking. Did someone already book a place for me too?" Her response came 5 minutes later. "Oh, completely forgot. Everything's full now. Maybe you can find something nearby?" "Sorry, sweetie." No explanation, no apology. Just an oops. As if this kind of thing hadn't been happening since I was 14. I stared at the message for a long moment, heart pounding, a mix of disbelief and a sickeningly familiar sting in my chest. They'd done it again. Forgotten. Or at least pretended to. You see, in my family, I was always the afterthought. The extra chair at the table, the one they forgot to include in group photos, the one whose birthday always fell through the cracks of their busy schedules, the one who didn't quite fit the mold. Daniel was the golden child. Business school, 2 kids, family man, successful in the traditional way. Laura was the fun cousin who was always loud, always included, always seen. And I was Anna, single, quiet, ambitious in ways they didn't understand. I built a small but thriving interior design studio over 10 years. I traveled, worked with clients all over Europe, and had just finished a project for one of the most well-known luxury hotels in Spain. But none of that seemed to register with my family. "You should really think about getting a stable job," my mother had said during our last holiday. "Your work sounds more like a hobby," Laura added, sipping from her Aperol spritz. I had nodded politely, smiled even, but deep down it chipped away at me. This time, though, I wasn't going to cry in the bathroom or cancel the trip in quiet humiliation. I was going to do something else. I opened my laptop, still staring at the group chat buzzing with excitement about their mid-range seaside apartments. I clicked open a different browser tab and typed 3 simple words: Ibiza Luxury Villas. The family holiday was supposed to be a budget-friendly 5-day trip to celebrate my mother's birthday. A cozy group vacation, she'd said. But now they had booked every apartment in the small complex and conveniently left me out. There it was. Villa Azul, 7 bedrooms, infinity pool, ocean view, private chef, staff 24/7, 18,000 euros for 5 days. A pause, then a smile. Perfect. I didn't hesitate. I booked it. And just for fun, I scheduled the Rolls-Royce Ghost I'd just added to my design business portfolio as a rental property investment, my latest venture. I forwarded the confirmation to my assistant with a note. "Please make sure the villa is pre-stocked with my mother's favorite wine. Label everything for Miss Anna. I want it to be unforgettable. Because if there's one thing I've learned from being treated like an afterthought your whole life, it's that silence isn't always strength. Sometimes silence is strategy." 2 days later, while they continued planning group activities without me, I quietly confirmed every last detail. The airport pickup, the villa staff uniforms, the engraved welcome note in every room. My assistant texted back, "Everything is arranged. Shall I have the villa manager notify the main resort when you arrive?" I replied, "No. Let's keep it a surprise. I want to see their faces." And I meant it. Because for 31 years, I had waited for someone in that family to really see me. In 3 days, they finally would. And they wouldn't forget again. The wheels of the Rolls-Royce crunched softly over the gravel driveway of the villa. Morning sunlight sparkled on the Mediterranean waves just beyond the glass fence, and the scent of saltwater and jasmine filled the air. I stepped out of the car in silence, my white linen jumpsuit catching the breeze, sunglasses reflecting the stretch of coastline behind me. Welcome to Villa Azul, Miss Anna, the villa manager said, bowing slightly. Everything is prepared exactly as requested. Thank you, I replied, my voice calm and controlled. From the villa's elevated terrace, I could see the cluster of small vacation apartments where my family was staying just down the hill. They looked cheerful, cozy, average. And I was home. As the staff unloaded my luggage, I glanced down toward the apartment complex. A group was gathering by the pool. Daniel, Laura, my mom, and several others. Loud laughter echoed faintly up the hill. I could tell the moment someone noticed the Rolls Royce. Heads turned. Laura's sunglasses came off. Daniel stopped mid-conversation. My mom shaded her eyes with one hand. I walked inside without looking back. The villa was stunning. White marble floors, floor-to-ceiling glass walls, a gourmet kitchen with fresh fruit and champagne already chilled. On the massive dining table, the framed photo of Mom from her 50th birthday party, just as I'd requested, surrounded by her favorite flowers. The same Mom who had texted completely forgot as if I were some distant cousin, not her daughter. I stood for a moment staring at the photo. Then I walked over, picked it up, and moved it. It didn't belong at the center anymore. Not today. I gave them an hour. An hour to wonder. An hour to sweat. An hour to realize that the girl they thought they had dismissed, left behind, forgotten, had just arrived in a way they never expected. At exactly noon, I descended the path toward the pool where they were gathered. The sound of clinking glasses and shallow conversation drifted up, but it all stopped when I rounded the corner. I took off my sunglasses and smiled. Hey, everyone. There was a beat of stunned silence. My mother blinked rapidly. Daniel actually did a double take. Laura's jaw dropped, frozen mid-sip from her mimosa. Anna? My mother asked, as if she weren't sure whether to believe her own eyes. Of course it's Anna, Daniel muttered, recovering. She just arrived in a freaking Rolls Royce. I thought everything was full, Laura asked, turning to Mom. Mom stammered. I thought you weren't coming. I managed to find something nearby, I said smoothly. Last minute. Lucky, huh? Where are you staying? Daniel asked. I pointed upward. Villa Azul. Daniel blinked. That villa? The one with the private chef and the infinity pool? Laura added. Yes, I said, brushing invisible dust from my wrist. That one. There was another moment of silence, the kind that stretches uncomfortably, held together by 1,000 unspoken things. Guilt, confusion, pride. Well, Mom finally said, forcing a smile. I'm glad you made it. We thought you'd be upset. Why would I be upset? I asked, looking directly at her. It's just a family holiday. You said you forgot. Laura tried to break the tension. Well, maybe we can all come see your place later. It sounds amazing. I'm sure you'll see plenty of it, I said casually. I've arranged a birthday dinner there tomorrow night. Everything's catered. Chef Julian's flying in from Barcelona. Mom blinked. You arranged dinner? At your place? I smiled wider. Of course, it's your birthday. I wanted to make it special. Truthfully, it had nothing to do with making it special. It had everything to do with being seen. I had spent too many years watching Daniel's endless promotions being celebrated, Laura's new condos admired, everyone else's milestones paraded around like trophies. Meanwhile, my successes were footnotes, if they were acknowledged at all. Anna, Mom said, her tone gentler now. You didn't need to do all that. Maybe I did, I said quietly. Maybe it was time. Back at the villa, I stood on the terrace with a glass of champagne, watching the sun begin its slow descent into the ocean. Down below, I could still see my family at the pool. All their laughter had quieted. They looked up at the villa more than once. I didn't wave. I didn't need to. The message was already delivered. And tomorrow, the real dinner would begin. With the wine, with the speeches, and with the truth. The next evening, just before sunset, Villa Azul shimmered in candlelight. Golden lanterns floated above the infinity pool, casting warm reflections across the still water. Tables were set beneath the pergola, draped in white linen and lined with crystal, gold flatware, and personalized name cards, each printed in calligraphy. A soft breeze carried the scent of rosemary, grilled sea bass, and Mom's favorite dessert, lemon olive oil cake. The birthday dinner was ready. I stood near the entrance in a tailored silk dress, watching the staff make final adjustments. Behind me, the soft hum of a string quartet filled the air. The entire setup was elegant, intentional, sharp. I wanted it to feel like something they'd remember, because this dinner wasn't just a celebration, it was a statement. The Rolls-Royces arrived in sequence, just as I planned. The same luxury fleet they had watched me step out of 2 days before. Now, they were stepping into my world. Mom stepped out first, in her favorite navy gown, one she'd worn for Daniel's company award gala last year. Dad followed, stiff in his linen jacket, glancing around the villa like he was still trying to piece it all together. Daniel and his wife clutched hands, their faces blank but alert. Laura, as always, looked effortlessly composed until she saw the cake display. "Is that flown in from Giacomo's in Milan?" she whispered. I smiled. Chef Julian made it himself. Silence again. Surprise. Discomfort. A hint of awe. They were used to being the center of the story. Tonight they were just guests. As everyone took their seats, the mood slowly shifted. The champagne softened their edges. The food amazed them. I watched the tension unwind, replaced by curiosity. Mom turned to me, tone light and curious. "This place is just beyond anything I imagined. Really, Anna? I had no idea." "Most people didn't," I said, sipping my wine. "You've done well," Dad added, a bit gruff, like it pained him to say it. "Very well." "I'm glad you think so," I replied calmly. "It's been a long journey." By the time dessert arrived, I stood to speak. Everyone fell quiet. I looked around the table, at the faces that had smiled at each other for decades, often without seeing the one face that lingered just outside the frame. Mine. "I want to thank you all for coming tonight," I began, voice steady. "I know this trip was meant to be low-key, casual, but when I heard there wasn't room for me in the apartment bookings..." A ripple of discomfort moved across the table. I decided to make my own arrangements, something appropriate. A few half-laughs, nervous, unsure of the tone. Mom shifted uncomfortably. "Anna, we really didn't mean to exclude you. It was just..." "Forgotten, I know," I said, locking eyes with her. "It's okay. It's not the first time." That stung more than I let on, but I didn't let my voice crack. I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. "I used to think I had to earn a seat at this table by proving I was like the rest of you," I continued. "By taking a safer path, by downplaying my choices, by accepting being underestimated." A long silence. "But over the years, I built something. Quietly. While you were all comparing promotions, bonuses, new mortgages, and Teslas, I was building a business that now serves clients across 6 countries. I'm not saying this for applause," I added as Laura's eyes flicked away. "I'm saying this because I spent too long thinking your validation meant something I needed." I paused. "But I don't. Not anymore." Mom spoke first. Her voice was small. "Anna, we never wanted you to feel..." "I know," I interrupted. "You never wanted me to feel left out. You just forgot me again and again." The honesty landed like a thunderclap. Daniel looked down at his napkin. Laura sipped her water without meeting my eyes. Dad stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. I took a breath and softened. "But I forgive you. I really do. This dinner isn't about revenge. It's about rewriting the narrative. It's about finally stepping into the space I've always deserved to occupy." "Anna," Mom said, her voice trembling, "this is overwhelming." "It's not meant to be overwhelming," I replied gently. It's meant to be seen. We ended the night with toasts and quiet conversation. Some avoided me. Others offered nervous compliments, but I didn't mind. I wasn't here for applause. I was here for closure. And maybe, for the first time in my life, I'd finally found it. Tomorrow I'd show them more. The studio, the clients. The Forbes mentioned they'd never noticed. But for tonight, I let the silence speak. Because sometimes silence says, I don't need your permission anymore. The next morning, the villa was quiet. A soft golden haze blanketed the ocean as the first rays of sun stretched across the horizon. I stood barefoot on the terrace with a cup of coffee, letting the silence settle into my bones. Last night had been intense and necessary. Today would be different. It was time for them to see, not just hear, what I had built. By mid-morning, the Rolls-Royces had arrived again, this time to bring everyone back to the villa for what I had titled the Vision Tour. I could tell from their expressions they didn't quite know what to expect. Mom looked nervous. Dad, guarded. Daniel whispered something to Laura, who shrugged but looked genuinely curious. I greeted them warmly. I hope you brought comfortable shoes. We'll be walking through 15 years of work today. We started in the great room, where I had set up a series of tall panels, each one featuring a different project from my firm. There were luxury hotels, boutique apartments, celebrity homes. I had included design sketches, final photos, and notes from high-profile clients who'd offered permission to be named. Their eyes moved slowly over the displays. I saw Daniel stop at the plaque from Condé Nast Traveler, listing my firm as one of the top 10 visionary design studios in Europe. Mom paused in front of a photo of my work featured in Architectural Digest, a space she had once called too modern when I showed her an early draft years ago. I had no idea. She whispered. No, I replied gently. You didn't ask. From there, we walked through the private studio wing of the villa, my real workspace. There, I kept physical models, mood boards, client prototypes, and timelines for upcoming projects. This is the expansion phase, I explained as we entered the long gallery room. In the past 3 years, I've opened branches in Paris, Lisbon, and New York. My work's now contracted through developers across 2 continents. Dad gave a low whistle. This is serious scale. Has been for a while, I said, walking to a large screen and turning it on. I've even been developing a software platform for real-time virtual interior staging. AI-enhanced, of course. Launching next spring. Daniel leaned forward. That's really advanced. Who's funding this? I am, I replied. He looked stunned. I guided them to a wall I'd saved for last. It held 4 simple frames. Each one contained an email or message from my family. Dismissive, belittling, or simply indifferent. One was a forwarded message from Laura. Let's not ask Anna to decorate the lake house. She does weird stuff. Another was from Dad. Maybe it's time you thought about something practical. And next to each one, a photo of the project that followed the message. The awards, the client testimonials, the revenue numbers. Silence fell. Mom stepped forward and touched the frame with her own message. We don't want to see you struggle anymore, sweetie. She turned to me, her eyes glistening. I thought I was helping. I know you did, I said. But it wasn't help. It was doubt, wrapped in concern. We moved into the media room where I had prepared a short film, just 5 minutes long. A visual timeline of my journey. Clips of me working in that tiny one-room studio in Lisbon. Snippets from client interviews, project unveilings, magazine covers, footage from when I was featured in a panel on design tech in Dubai. The final shot was a slow zoom out from my desk to reveal the entire global team I now employed. I looked around as the lights came back on. No one spoke for a moment. Then Daniel let out a long breath. You built a legacy, Anna. Finally, the words I'd waited years to hear. Afterward, we walked back out into the sunlit courtyard. Mom took my hand. You weren't just making spaces beautiful. she said quietly. You were making space for yourself, for your dreams. I smiled. Exactly. That afternoon, the family returned to their rental apartments in silence, taking folders I had prepared for them, portfolios, investment briefs, notes from early projects they had ignored or laughed off. I didn't expect them to say sorry. I didn't need them to. But I wanted them to walk away knowing that while they had underestimated me, I had never underestimated myself. Later that evening, I sat alone on the villa terrace as the sun dipped behind the cliffs, bathing the ocean in gold and rose. The soft hush of waves filled the silence, and I let the breeze calm my mind. The tour had gone exactly as planned, maybe even better. But I knew it wasn't over yet. Because when people are forced to see you differently, they either evolve or retreat into old patterns. My phone buzzed. A message from Sarah, my assistant back in Lisbon. Just a heads up, Mr. Graham, your father, is waiting at the villa entrance. Says he'd like to speak privately. Of course he did. I found him waiting near the edge of the garden, hands clasped behind his back, eyes fixed on the horizon like he was about to deliver a business pitch, not apologize to his daughter. Beautiful view, he said without turning. It is. He nodded slowly, then faced me. You've built something extraordinary, Anna. I'll admit that freely. I raised an eyebrow. Freely? He smiled faintly. Well, maybe not easily. You caught us off guard. That wasn't the plan, I replied. But the truth tends to do that. He looked at the villa behind me, the tall glass walls, the clean lines, the scent of lavender still lingering from the gardens. You've always been talented. I just never imagined it would scale like this. Because it didn't fit your definition of success, I said, sharper than I intended. He didn't deny it. Instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder, a formal-looking document with a Sullivan Holdings logo on the front. This is a proposal, he said. We'd like to explore a partnership. I took the folder, leafing through it quickly. Pages of projections, merge options, cross-promotional branding. You want to bring my design firm under your umbrella? I asked, staring at him. We think it would elevate both brands, he said carefully. You've clearly established market power, but with the backing of our firm, our network, you could scale even faster. We'd offer capital, infrastructure, access to corporate real estate clients. I held up a hand. You're pitching me like I'm on Shark Tank, Dad. He paused. I'm trying to make amends, in my way. My jaw clenched. Where was this support when I was designing apartments out of a €300 a month studio in Lisbon? When I showed you my first renders and you called them frivolous doodles? When I asked you to invest €5,000 and you told me, quote, that's not a bet I'd take on my own child? His face flushed slightly. That was a long time ago. Not to me. We stood in silence for a long moment. The breeze shifted. Dad? I said finally. Do you even like my work? He looked taken aback. What? My style, my philosophy. Do you believe in it? Or do you just believe in numbers now that I'm too big to fail? He opened his mouth, closed it. I'll be honest, I don't always understand it, but clearly others do. I smiled bitterly. There it is. I'm not looking to be absorbed, I said quietly. Not now. Not by the firm that spent years politely dismissing my entire vision. He nodded slowly. So it's a no. It's a not yet, I corrected. Maybe we can work together on a specific project, a collaboration, on my terms. He looked surprised, then thoughtful. That might work. And I'll send my lawyer the details of the licensing rights, I added. We do things transparently now. He chuckled, a little bitter, a little proud. You've become formidable. I had to be. He turned to leave but paused. You've always been smart, Anna. I see that now. I'm sorry it took this long. I didn't respond. I simply watched him walk away, across the stone path, past the lavender beds, back toward the world that once never had room for me. Later that night, I found a message from Daniel on my phone. "Do you have a minute tomorrow? Just us?" It didn't surprise me. The dynamic was shifting. One by one, they were beginning to realize the person they had underestimated now stood at the center of the story. And they were no longer sure where they fit in it. The final morning of the trip arrived with a calm breeze and a sky painted in pale pink and blue. I stood barefoot on the beach in front of the villa, letting the water rush over my toes. The sea had a way of clearing out the noise, grounding everything. In just a few hours, the family would board their flights back to their apartments, routines, and tightly knit group chats. But things wouldn't be quite the same anymore. Because they had seen me now. Not the version they had created. The quiet, artsy one always figuring things out. But me. The version that had never needed their permission. A soft knock came on the terrace door. I turned to see Daniel standing there, hands in his pockets, eyes unreadable. "Walk with me?" he asked. We strolled the edge of the water in silence for a minute. "I owe you an apology," he said at last. "I think I always believed I was protecting you when I doubted you." "By dismissing me?" I asked softly. He nodded. "Yeah, that's what it was. I didn't understand your choices, so I minimized them. I thought that made me the responsible one. The mature one." "You were the favorite," I said without bitterness. "You played the part they wanted." "And you didn't," he replied, which took more courage than I ever had. We stopped walking. The waves curled around our ankles. "I saw your firm's numbers," he said. "I researched everything after last night. What you've done, Anna. It's not just impressive. It's visionary." I met his gaze. "Thank you." He hesitated. "Would you ever let me invest? Privately? I'm not asking for favors, just, I believe in what you're building." This time, the surprise didn't sting. It warmed. "I'll think about it," I said with a smile. "Let's talk soon, in a different context." He nodded. We hugged. For the first time in years, it felt genuine. Back at the villa, the family gathered for one last breakfast. The staff had prepared a spread on the veranda. Pastries, fresh fruit, eggs, local cheeses. There was still some awkwardness in the air, but also softness. Laura avoided eye contact, but I noticed she'd changed the tone. No sarcastic quips, no condescension. Instead, she approached me with 2 mimosas. "Truce?" she asked, offering one. I took it. "Your place is beautiful," she said. "I get why you kept it quiet. We would have ruined it." I gave a half smile. "Maybe?" She nodded. "You were right, you know. I loved playing the successful cousin, picking up the check. It made me feel like I mattered. That's on me." "I get it," I said. "I've done things for approval too, just in different ways." Laura glanced around. "So, what happens now?" "I'm not going anywhere," I said. "But I'm also not shrinking to make everyone else feel comfortable anymore." As they packed up to leave, I watched from the upper balcony. The Rolls-Royces lined up again, luggage neatly loaded, conversations more careful than before. My parents walked toward the car together, slower than usual. Mom turned back one last time, eyes meeting mine. This time, there was no fake smile, just something softer. A quiet nod. I returned it. I didn't need anything else. Back inside, the villa fell silent. The candles were extinguished, the glasses cleared. The space returned to stillness, like it had been holding its breath all week. I walked through the rooms alone, barefoot, touching the marble countertops, the tall glass windows, the carefully curated art on the walls. All of it mine. All of it earned. I stopped by the last framed piece in my office, a copy of the email I had sent to my father 6 years ago, asking for a small investment. His response below, "Anna, I just don't see how this scales. Maybe stick to freelancing for now." I smiled and tapped the frame. "Thank you," I whispered. Because in the end, every doubt became fuel. Every rejection became clarity. As the sun set, I poured a glass of wine and stepped onto the terrace, barefoot once again. The wind was warm, and the air smelled like salt and lavender. I thought about the girl I was 15 years ago. Eager, hungry, quietly fierce, and desperate for approval from people who could never truly give it. And I thought about who I'd become. Not in spite of them, but without them. I raised my glass to the sea, to the silence, to the seat I had built for myself at a table no one else designed. To the ones they forgot, I whispered. To the ones who remember themselves. "12 years, Allie. That's a long time to be an assistant." The words floated across the sleek glass desk like poison wrapped in silk. I sat motionless, the corners of my mouth refusing to twitch. My eyes locked on the man I'd reported to for nearly a decade, Vice President Marcus Grant. His tone was casual, almost friendly, but the weight of what he was saying pressed down on my chest like a boulder. I already knew. The signs had been building for months. The sudden cancellations of meetings I'd always attended. The accidental exclusion from department-wide emails. The whispered conversations that stopped the moment I walked into the room. And of course, the new golden boy, Caleb. Fresh out of business school, louder than necessary, and always within arm's reach of Marcus with coffee in hand and compliments on his tongue. "I understand," I said calmly, folding my hands in my lap even as my heart pounded in my ears. "Is this effective immediately?" Marcus looked almost relieved that I wasn't crying or yelling. That wasn't my style. "You'll receive 2 weeks severance. HR will help you transition out by the end of the day. And for what it's worth, Allie, this isn't personal." Of course it wasn't personal. That's what people always say when they gut you without blinking. "I see," I said, rising to my feet with practiced grace. "Then let me be the first to congratulate Caleb." Marcus cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with my composure. "He's got potential, and we need people who think big. And people who say yes to everything you suggest," I added with a gentle smile. "I'll gather my things." I extended my hand across the desk. Marcus hesitated, then shook it. His grip was firm, but I noticed the slight tremble. Maybe somewhere deep down he knew this wasn't right. But he did it anyway. The door to his office clicked shut behind me. I made my way down the hallway, past the cubicles where whispers were already starting. I didn't look at anyone. Not yet. My desk was neatly organized. Always had been. I pulled out a cardboard box from beneath, the one I had kept just in case. You don't last 12 years in corporate without preparing for sudden endings. As I packed my notebooks, the USB drive tucked into the far left drawer caught my eye. Black, unmarked, and seemingly ordinary. I'd built the company's internal tracking and inventory system over 6 years. Not in my job description, but I did it because no one else could. Every bug fix, every custom patch, every update lived on that USB. I hadn't touched it since Caleb started shadowing me. I tucked it into my bag. "Allie?" It was Jenna from compliance, standing awkwardly at the edge of my cubicle. Her face looked pale, confused. "Is it true?" I nodded once. "It's true. But why?" "Apparently assistants don't get promoted," I said, my voice steady. Jenna looked horrified. "But you do everything. Half of this department would fall apart without you." I smiled, more genuinely this time. "Well, I guess we're about to find out." As I walked toward the exit, a familiar sting rose in the back of my throat. I wasn't just leaving a job. I was leaving a part of myself. 12 years of loyalty, of solving problems before they reached anyone's desk, of cleaning up messes no one even knew existed. No performance review. No thank you. Just a handshake and a door. The parking lot was unusually bright for a Friday afternoon. I sat in my car for a moment, letting silence wrap around me like a weighted blanket. My phone buzzed. A message from my sister. Lunch this weekend? You've been MIA lately. I stared at the message and exhaled slowly. I hadn't told anyone what was happening. Not yet. I wanted to process it first. Alone. Back at the office, I imagined Caleb sliding into my old chair, firing up the system I had spent years building. He had no idea how much was custom-coded. No idea how fragile it was without the correct maintenance sequence. And no idea that the only person who fully understood it had just walked out the door with a quiet smile and a black USB in her purse. That night, I poured a glass of wine, opened my laptop, and logged into a private backup account I'd created long ago, the one no one knew about. The system was stable, for now. But if someone made even a minor change in the wrong module, well, tomorrow would be interesting. The next morning, I woke early, out of habit more than anything else. 12 years of routine doesn't disappear overnight. The sunlight was just beginning to filter through the curtains as I sipped my coffee and opened my laptop. No alarms, no urgent emails, no long to-do list waiting for me. For the first time in over a decade, my day was entirely my own. And yet, something inside me buzzed. A strange tension, like the charged air before a thunderstorm. At 9:13 a.m., it started. My phone lit up with a flurry of messages. Jenna, Allie, something's wrong with the system. Files are missing? Ben from IT. Hey, weird question. Do you remember how the inventory software logs updates? We can't access anything after Q3. Tamara from accounting. Emergency. Are you available to talk? Please? I leaned back in my chair, my heart beating calmly. I wasn't gloating. I wasn't even angry anymore. I just felt inevitable, like watching dominoes fall that someone else had lined up. Because here's the thing. The custom system I'd built worked beautifully, as long as you understood its intricacies. Every quarter, there was a scheduled update. Every month, there were manual data reconciliations that had to be triggered, or else the cascading backups would lock. It was all documented, in a guide that Caleb had bragged he didn't need to read. My phone vibrated again, harder this time. Jenna. Marcus is losing it. System crashed. They can't process orders. Help? Another message popped up seconds later. Unknown number. Allie, this is Marcus. Call me immediately. I smiled softly, setting my phone down. It kept buzzing, relentless, desperate. I watched the screen until it stopped, leaving a heavy silence behind. At 9:57 a.m., the corporate website went offline. By 10:15 a.m., the VP's direct line was blowing up from vendors, clients, and other departments needing access to inventory data they couldn't retrieve. It was pure chaos. And I wasn't even there. I wasn't malicious. I hadn't sabotaged anything. I had simply left. And the house of cards Marcus had built on arrogance and favoritism collapsed the moment it lost the one thing he had underestimated: knowledge. At 11:06 a.m., sitting at my favorite local cafe with a second cup of coffee, I finally allowed myself to open the email Marcus had sent. Subject: urgent. Request for assistance, Allie. I realize yesterday's conversation may have been abrupt. However, given the unexpected technical issues we're currently facing, I would greatly appreciate any documentation, notes, or guidance you can provide on the tracking and inventory systems you previously managed. This would be a tremendous help to the team and the company as a whole. We are willing to compensate you for your time. Please contact me as soon as possible. Regards, Marcus Grant, VP Operations. I reread the message twice, savoring the irony. 12 years, and all it took was 24 hours for them to realize the value they'd thrown away. I glanced at the clock. 11:15 a.m. Just about the time corporate would be holding the emergency crisis meeting. The one I would have normally organized, prepared notes for, and led calmly through solution steps. Instead, they had Caleb. And from what Jenna had texted me, Caleb was currently blaming the servers, the IT department, and even the outdated system for everything, never once admitting he hadn't taken the time to learn how it truly worked. I closed Marcus's email without replying. Some lessons are best learned the hard way. By noon, LinkedIn was buzzing with rumors. Layoffs were rumored. Client delays were stacking up. The company's biggest client, Eversource Logistics, had allegedly pulled a scheduled meeting due to technical instability concerns. I didn't dance around my apartment or celebrate. I felt a solemn kind of satisfaction. Not because they were struggling, but because the truth always surfaces eventually. The problem wasn't me. It never had been. It was their culture. Rewarding loudness over loyalty, favoring flash over substance. I'd spent years being the steady foundation they didn't bother to notice until it was gone. And now? Now they were standing on quicksand, sinking with every desperate email and every frantic phone call. My phone buzzed again. Another message, this time from Jenna. Jenna. Just a heads up. Marcus just got called into an emergency session with the CEO. People are furious. They're asking why you weren't promoted instead of Caleb. I smiled faintly, picturing Marcus sweating through his $1,000 suit, trying to explain away his reckless decision. The river was rushing fast now, pulling everything loose and unstable downstream. But like my father used to say, and I was beginning to truly understand, the rocks stay steady, and I was steady, steadier than I had ever been. By Monday morning, the damage was no longer containable. The company's client portal was down. Internal systems were partially restored, but reports were full of errors. Deliveries were delayed. Orders were duplicated, lost, or worse, rerouted to incorrect locations. Vendors were furious. Clients were panicking. And inside the company, Marcus Grant had gone from smug and composed to visibly unraveling. I knew because Jenna kept me updated, sending texts like dispatches from the front lines. Jenna. Marcus looked like he hadn't slept in 3 days. CEO tore into him in front of everyone. Caleb was literally sweating through his shirt. I hadn't replied to any of Marcus's emails or messages. Not because I wanted revenge. That wasn't the point. It was about respect. And they had shown me none. 12 years of loyalty. Of staying late without being asked. Of fixing things no one else even knew were broken. Of training interns and smoothing conflicts and covering for other people's mistakes. And I was told, to my face, that assistants don't get promoted. Now, all those invisible things I used to handle had suddenly become very visible. At 11:30 a.m., I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. Normally, I would have let it go to voicemail, but something told me to answer. Hello? Allie Peterson? A woman's voice asked. Calm, professional. Yes? This is Angela Browning, executive assistant to Darren Shaw, CEO of Westbridge Logistics. I blinked. Westbridge, one of our former competitors, a big one. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time, she continued. Mr. Shaw would like to meet with you this week. Your name came highly recommended. My breath caught slightly. May I ask who recommended me? There was a pause. I believe it was one of your former clients at Eversource. They said, and I quote, "She's the only reason we renewed with them last year." I exhaled slowly. I'd be happy to speak with Mr. Shaw. Wonderful, Angela said. We'll set something up for Thursday morning. After we ended the call, I stared at my phone for a long moment. My hands weren't shaking. My chest wasn't tight. This wasn't panic. It was possibility. That evening, I met my sister for dinner. Elena, the practical one. HR director at a healthcare firm, never missed a step in life. We sat at a small Italian place near the river, the kind we used to visit when we were kids and still believed everything in life was fair and made sense. She listened quietly as I told her everything. The firing, the crash, the aftermath. And then I showed her Marcus's original termination email. Cold. Detached. Like it had been written for a printer, not a person. Elena's eyes darkened. You know, you could sue, she said, cutting into her pasta with surgical precision. Not just for wrongful termination, but for discrimination. 12 years without promotion? That's not a coincidence. I don't want to sue, I said softly. I want to build something better. She raised an eyebrow. Meaning? I want to work somewhere that values what I do, where they see me as more than a background character. Somewhere I can grow, lead, be seen. She nodded slowly, then gave a small smile. You always did like fixing broken systems. Only when they're worth fixing, I replied. We clinked wine glasses over that. The next day, I received another email, this time from Paula Hensley, a senior director I used to support years ago before she transferred departments. Allie, I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I should have said something when I heard what Marcus did, but I was afraid of making waves, of putting my job at risk. It wasn't right. Everyone here knows it. You were the glue. Whatever you do next, they'll be lucky to have you. And if there's ever anything I can do, say the word. It made me pause, because I'd spent years thinking no one noticed, that everything I did was invisible. But it turns out, invisibility doesn't mean absence. People feel your absence, especially when the system starts to break where you used to hold it together. That afternoon, I logged onto my laptop and began updating my resume. It had been years. I opened LinkedIn and quietly toggled my open to work setting to public. Within an hour, I had 3 messages. By the next morning, I had 10. The world was opening in a way it never had before. Not because I shouted, not because I burned it all down, but because I had quietly walked away from what didn't value me and chose to let my work speak for itself. And it was speaking, loudly. The Westbridge Logistics Building was everything Summit Edge wasn't. Modern, open, inviting. Reception greeted me by name and offered espresso while I waited. The air smelled like citrus and fresh ambition, not desperation and old coffee. At exactly 9 a.m., Angela appeared with a warm smile and escorted me to the top floor. Mr. Shaw is looking forward to meeting you, she said, then added in a quieter voice. Everyone here is talking about what happened at Summit Edge. You made quite an impression. I gave a polite nod, though my heart was pounding. I wasn't nervous, not exactly. But after being written off as just an assistant for over a decade, walking into a meeting as a sought-after candidate felt surreal. Darren Shaw stood as I entered his office. He was tall, early 50s, dressed in a blazer with no tie, confident without being arrogant. Allie, he said warmly, extending his hand. We finally meet. Thank you for the invitation, I replied, shaking his hand. Please sit. Can I get you anything? I'm good, thank you. We settled into the leather chairs across from each other, sunlight spilling in through the glass behind him. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. I've spoken with several people, vendors, clients, even a few of your old teammates. They all said the same thing. You were the backbone of that department. I stayed quiet. They also said you were overlooked, passed over, undervalued. Still, I said nothing, just met his gaze. Darren continued, Our industry doesn't often reward quiet excellence. It chases the loudest voice in the room, but I'm more interested in the one who keeps the machine running when no one's looking. I felt something loosen in my chest at those words. Something I hadn't realized had been tight for years. He slid a folder across the table. I'd like you to review this. Inside was an offer letter. Director of Operations, Regional Supply Chain Division, full benefits, competitive salary, 35% more than what I had made at Summit Edge. And most shocking of all, a personal budget to build a support team from the ground up. I want someone who understands the ground level and the strategy. And I want you to hire who you trust. Start fresh. We're expanding into 3 new markets, and I need stability at the core. I looked up, stunned. You're offering me a division? I'm offering you autonomy. I don't micromanage. You've already proven you can manage circles around most so-called leaders in this field. The voice in my head, the one Summit Edge had cultivated over the years, tried to whisper, You're just an assistant. Don't get ahead of yourself. But I silenced it, because I wasn't just anything. I never had been. I nodded once. I'd like a few days to consider. Take your time, Darren said, but we'd like you to start as soon as possible. As Angela walked me out, she grinned. We've never seen Darren this excited about a hire. You've shaken up more than one executive office this week. Outside, I stood on the sidewalk, watching traffic buzz past. My phone buzzed. A text from Jenna. Marcus was just escorted out of the building, effective immediately. No warning. I stared at the message, rereading it twice. Then another message came in. Tamara from accounting. Dan stepping in temporarily. But there's talk of a full audit. They're blaming Marcus for the system crash and the client fallout. Everyone's nervous. So it had finally happened. Not just a ripple, but a full break. And suddenly, I wasn't angry. I wasn't even satisfied. I was ready. That evening, I sat at my dining table with a pen and the Westbridge offer letter. I thought about every late night at Summit Edge, every ignored suggestion, every time I'd been praised privately but kept hidden publicly. And then I thought about the team I used to work with. The people like Jenna and Tamara and a few others still stuck under leaders who never saw them. Maybe now I could be the kind of leader I had always needed. I signed the offer. Then I picked up my phone and began writing a message. Not to Marcus or Caleb or anyone at Summit Edge, but to Jenna. Hey, I accepted a new role today. A real one. They're giving me a budget to build a team from scratch. If you're interested, I want you with me. 10 seconds later, Jenna. Name the time and place. I'm in. I smiled and sent 2 more messages. Then I opened my laptop and pulled out the list I'd quietly kept for years. The names of people who deserved better. 3 weeks after signing with Westbridge, I walked into my new office, a corner suite on the 5th floor overlooking the skyline. The nameplate on the door read, Allie Peterson, Director of Regional Operations. I stood there for a moment before stepping inside, letting it sink in. I hadn't been handed this role. I had earned it. And now I had something even rarer than a promotion. I had trust, a new company, a blank canvas, a team to build from the ground up. And I already knew who I wanted. Jenna was the first hire. She'd put in her resignation the day after I texted her. She didn't even wait to give 2 weeks. She didn't need to. Tamara followed. Then another from IT. Word spread quickly, like it always does in our industry. I didn't poach anyone. I simply offered something better. Respect. A voice. A seat at the table. I held interviews, reviewed applications, but half the candidates came from people I had worked with in the past. People who had seen how I operated. Quietly, efficiently, without ego. By the end of the month, I had a full team assembled. Sharp, loyal, experienced professionals who had been overlooked for far too long. At our first team meeting, I stood at the front of a bright conference room, holding a marker in one hand and a sense of purpose in the other. I'm not here to micromanage you, I said. You know how to do your jobs. You've done them for years without credit. What I want to know is, what tools do you need to do them better? That question sparked 2 hours of honest, passionate conversation. We talked about broken workflows, outdated software, communication gaps, and burnout from carrying departments that never thanked us. We didn't just build a new structure. We dismantled the old one, brick by brick, and built something better in its place. Meanwhile, Summit Edge was hemorrhaging. The week after I started at Westbridge, one of their major clients, Eversource Logistics, pulled out entirely. A quiet exit. No press release. Just silence. And then nothing. Jenna had coffee with an old friend who still worked there. The gossip came like a flood. Marcus had been let go. Caleb was reassigned to a meaningless project. The CEO was furious. The board had launched an internal investigation. Apparently, someone had anonymously sent copies of internal emails to HR, including mine. Marcus's cold dismissal. His refusal to promote long-term employees. His cover-ups when systems began to fail. I never found out who sent them. But I had my suspicions. Late one afternoon, I received a call from a number I hadn't seen in months. Allie? A hesitant voice asked. It's Dan, from Summit. I hadn't spoken to him since the day I cleared my desk. I'm sure you've heard about everything, he said awkwardly. We've taken some hits, big ones. I didn't reply. I just wanted to ask, off the record, did you send those emails to the board? I smiled, though he couldn't see it. No, Dan, but I'm glad someone did. He sighed. We were wrong about you. About a lot of things. I said nothing. We'd like to make things right. I glanced around at my office, at the plants near the window, at the frame message Jenna had left on my desk that morning. Real leaders don't need a title, but now you finally have both. Thanks, Dan, I said gently. But I already am. Then I hung up. That Friday, our team gathered at a rooftop bar to celebrate the end of our first month. We laughed, shared stories, talked about things that mattered. Not just numbers and deadlines, but goals and dreams and how seen everyone felt for the first time in years. Summit Edge used to be my plan for the next 10 years, Jenna said, sipping her wine. Now I can't believe I stayed as long as I did. You stayed because you believed in the work, I replied. We all did. And now? Tamara asked. Now, I said, we do it on our own terms. The sun dipped below the city skyline, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I had to prove myself. I didn't feel small. I didn't feel replaceable. I felt like exactly who I had always been. Capable, steady, and finally in a place that saw my worth. 3 months into my new role, Westbridge's quarterly report went public. 32% increase in regional efficiency. 2 major accounts acquired from competitors. Employee retention at an all-time high. At the bottom of the internal announcement, a note from CEO Darren Shaw. Exceptional leadership begins with those who understand the work. Allie Peterson and her team exemplify what happens when you recognize talent and trust it. This is just the beginning. I stared at that sentence for a long time. This is just the beginning. After 12 years of being background noise, I had finally become part of the conversation. 2 days later, a news alert popped up on my phone while I was reviewing a logistics proposal. Summit Edge to be acquired by GlobalX Freight Systems following client loss, internal turmoil. I clicked the article. It was clinical, like all corporate obituaries, full of quotes about strategic partnerships and refocusing priorities. But between the lines, the truth was clear. They'd lost 5 major accounts in 6 months. 3 had followed me to Westbridge. The rest had quietly exited after realizing there was no one left who truly understood the systems, the processes, or the people. Caleb had left the company a month ago. Dan had retired early, or so they said. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel cruel satisfaction. I felt confirmed. Everything I had endured, every quiet frustration, every overlooked contribution, it had meant something. Not because I burned it all down, but because I chose to build something better. That evening, I got a message from someone I hadn't heard from in over a year. Barbara Kent, former HR coordinator at Summit Edge. She had left shortly after I did. Rumor was she'd taken a role at a startup and was thriving. Her message was simple. Saw the news. They finally saw what happens when you fire the foundation. Proud of you. I typed a reply and paused before sending it. Then erased it. Sometimes silence is the most honest response. 3 weeks later, I was invited to speak at a regional leadership conference. The topic, Quiet Leadership and Lasting Impact. I almost said no. But I remembered all the meetings I used to sit in at Summit Edge, watching less qualified people talk over me, take credit, and rise while I remained invisible. And I realized I wasn't invisible anymore. So I said yes. I stood on stage in front of 200 executives and told them the story. Not of revenge, not of sabotage, but of misjudgment, perseverance, and the power of doing things the right way. I told them about being called just an assistant. I told them about the crash, the calls, the silence, and then the rebuilding. But most of all, I talked about what it means to lead with empathy, with quiet strength and with unwavering integrity. Afterward, 3 young women approached me, junior managers from different companies. One of them said, "I didn't think people like us could make it to the top without compromising who we are." I smiled. "We can, and we will. But you have to know your value, even when they don't." On the 1-year anniversary of my termination, Jenna and Tamara surprised me at the office with a cake, scrawled in chocolate across the top, "To the woman they couldn't replace." I laughed, truly laughed, as the whole team gathered around. Jason had just accepted a director role in our southern region. Tamara was leading a mentorship program. Jenna had been nominated for an industry award. Every one of them was growing, thriving, seen. We raised our glasses. Water, juice, coffee. It didn't matter. "To new beginnings," I said. "And to Allie," Jenna added, "for proving you don't have to burn bridges to move forward. Sometimes you just need to cross a better one." We clinked cups, and I looked around at the faces that once sat quietly at other people's meetings, now leading their own. We weren't the loudest. We weren't the flashiest. But we were the ones who held the line. The rocks in the river, the steady ones. And in the end, we were the ones who won.